What's going on, guys? Welcome to the video. As most of you well know, SNP leader Nicola Sturgeon yesterday called for powers to be devolved to them so they can set their own immigration policy. In other words, allowing freedom of movement into Scotland after the UK has left the European Union, which obviously would undermine the government's Australian-style points-based system that is planned to come in. Meaning every Tom, Dick and Harry in the EU would use that as a way to circumvent our immigration laws, meaning immigration would continue to the same levels it's at now, if not more. So obviously the government rejected this nonsense. But we have a Guardian article here that was talking about it yesterday, and we have a few articles from today which we will quickly skim over, along with a clip from Sky News where Nicola Sturgeon is skewered by Adam Bolton. The Guardian article headlines, Nicola Sturgeon calls for Scotland to have immigration powers. First Minister says country needs strategy to tackle falling birth rate and Brexit impact. Now, I don't know about you guys, but to me, that sounds like Nicola Sturgeon is trying to replace the Scottish people with Europeans. Maybe they're more likely to vote for her. Nicola Sturgeon has called for Scotland to have its own visa and immigration strategy to deal with the country's falling birth rate and the impacts of Brexit. The First Minister urged the UK government to start talks on devolving migration powers to the Scottish Parliament, to allow it to introduce a flexible Scottish visa without the tight restrictions in force across the rest of the UK. Essentially saying to everyone in the EU, come here through Scotland, we will give you a visa, and then you can just willy-nilly walk into the rest of the United Kingdom. Because of course, this dopey bint doesn't respect a country's sovereign borders. Holyrood would scrap the hefty application fee, salary threshold and employer sponsorship required by the Home Office. She said, this regional model is already used by Canadian provinces and Australian states, which is wonderful for Canada and Australia. We don't care. The government has said there is no freedom of movement, end of story. You are not going to bring it in through the back door. Sturgeon said ending free movement within the EU would harm the UK as a whole, but would be uniquely damaging for Scotland's economy and public services, because it is particularly vulnerable to population decline. Do you know what's more uniquely damaging to Scotland than anything else? The SNP government and independents under them. Given the way they run public health services and the absolute nonsense they come out with, they are by far the greatest threat to Scotland it has ever known. But listen to this absolute peach. A common UK-wide approach to immigration simply hasn't worked in Scotland's interests for some time now. You've literally just said ending freedom of movement would be harmful to Scotland, but at the same time you've said the common UK-wide approach, which is actually the EU approach to immigration, hasn't worked for Scotland's interests for some time now. So make your mind up. You either want freedom of movement because it works, or you want something different to freedom of movement because it hasn't been working for some time. What an absolute idiot this woman is. But anyway, that's enough of the Guardian article. Let's move on, because we have an Express article here. Sturgeon's radical plan for Scots Brexit visa dismantled as flaw open to abuse exposed, which is kind of obvious, so it's not really exposed. Anyone with half a brain cell is going to know this. And this also features the Sky News interview with Adam Bolton, where she is torn apart. Nicola Sturgeon's Scottish visa proposal was torn apart by Adam Bolton during an interview on Sky News, which we will take a look at in a second. Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon outlined her radical plans for a Scottish visa that would use the existing Scottish tax code to tie the visa to employment specifically in Scotland. However, Mr Bolton pointed out the proposal was unlikely to work because the visa would allow the possibility to move around Britain freely, not just Scotland, obviously. So let's take a listen to what she actually said rather than reading through it.
At the heart of these is a proposal for a Scottish visa, so somebody wanting to come to the UK, as well as the other routes of application, could apply specifically to come to work in Scotland. And we would use the existing Scottish tax code, which is in place as a result of devolution of income tax powers to the Scottish Parliament, to tie Scottish visas to employment here in Scotland. There are precedents for this kind of more regionalised approach to immigration in countries like Canada and Australia. So it's a practical, workable solution designed to address specific Scottish challenges, and I hope the UK Government will respond to it positively.
I mean, it's unlikely, isn't it? Because if you had a Scottish visa, people could come into Scotland and then, since we're one country, move around the country freely. They might abuse it.
Well, no, I don't think that is the case. What I said a moment ago, the visa would be tied to working in Scotland, and the Scottish tax code would be the foundation on which that system would be built. Of course, there would be detailed discussions we'd need to have about exactly how that operated in practice. But one of the things I think we need to do is switch our thinking on migration. The vast majority of people who certainly come to Scotland right now, and I think this is probably true across the UK, come to work to make a contribution to build lives and families here. They don't come to abuse the system, and very few do abuse the system. So yes, let's discuss these practicalities, but let's not build a system that is based on the assumption that everybody is at it and trying to abuse that system, because if we do that, then we continue to make it harder for people to come here, and from a Scottish perspective, that's deeply damaging.
Well, there you heard the stupidity for yourself. We will use the existing Scottish tax code to tie Scottish visas to employment here in Scotland. Yes, because that will prevent them from sneaking down to England and coming and living here, won't it? What the fuck is this woman actually on? When she was questioned on it by Adam Bolton, she skipped round it and continued with the same nonsense she was already talking. I mean, anyone with half a brain cell's going to know that people are going to exploit it. And as for her claim that very few come over here to milk it, I'm not so sure about that. I don't have the exact figures for myself, but I know it's not very few. There is going to be a fuck ton of people that have no right to milk this system and just milk it at the end of the day. Now, moving on, both of those stories were from yesterday. It has also continued today, as Priti Patel has joined in savaging Nicola Sturgeon's bullshit plans to get a separate Scottish post-Brexit visa system. Nicola Sturgeon's demands for a separate Scottish post-Brexit visa system has been rejected, as we all knew and expected from the get-go. The First Minister published a document yesterday outlining a number of ways the Scottish system could diverge from the rest of the UK, but the plans were roundly rejected by the Home Office, who said immigration would remain a reserved matter. In other words, Priti Patel, Boris Johnson and the rest of the government literally wiped their ass with the document they published yesterday. Speaking in Edinburgh, the SNP leader, we already know what that had to say. The document, Migration Helping Scotland Prosper, laid out 5 possible options for the creation of the visa system. Under Miss Sturgeon's preferred model for the scheme, migrants would apply separately to the Scottish Government for a visa to live only in Scotland, and Holyrood would recommend applications to the Home Office. The First Minister stressed the proposals were designed to work under devolution, but they could be adapted for use in an independent Scotland. Yeah, and in either case, if you was to be granted this, there would have to be a border and checks at it, otherwise the rest of the country would be in uproar. We voted for Brexit to end free movement, not for you to try and circumvent it, you worthless fuckpig. But of course, the Home Office said immigration would remain a reserved matter, as we see earlier. A spokesman said the UK government will introduce a points-based immigration system that works in the interests of the whole United Kingdom, including Scotland. We want to understand the specific needs of the whole UK, which is why we have engaged extensively with stakeholders across the UK, including the Scottish Government. In response to the Home Office comments, Ben Macpherson, the Scottish Government's Minister for Europe, Migration and International Development, said the proposals for a tailored migration policy for Scotland are supported by employers, universities and organisations across Scotland, and are an essential part of sustaining and improving economic growth, prosperity and public services. Now, I don't know if any of you's noticed in there something that I noticed that he didn't mention once. He said this is supported by employers, universities and organisations across Scotland. Not once does he mention the actual people of Scotland. I wonder what their opinion is on you allowing unrestricted migration to their country. I bet their opinions won't be favourable. That's why he didn't mention them. Because let's not forget, these MPs are supposed to work for the people, not universities, employers, organisations or anyone else. You know, the voters. A failure by the UK government to support proposals to meet Scotland's unique needs would be a further sign that the system does not work for Scotland, and it is hoped the UK government rethinks this out-of-touch response. I think yous lot need to rethink your out-of-touch agenda. But you ain't gonna listen, much the same as the government doesn't need to listen to the SNP and its puppet government. And to finish up, we have Andrew Neil trolling Nicola Sturgeon. This Express article from this morning reads, Andrew Neil loses his temper with Nicola Sturgeon's failure after damning Scotland report. It says here, the BBC presenter posted a thread on Twitter detailing the latest index of social and economic well-being that showed Scotland has plummeted down the world rankings of developed countries in ranking of national well-being. The report, compiled by a leading Scottish economist, showed Scotland has fallen 5 places, from 16th to 21st, in a list of 32 countries who are members of the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD. So, 21st out of 32, you're only 11 away from rock bottom, and you want to be an independent nation, while screaming about how the Tories or UK governments have failed Scotland. It seems since you've been the puppet government of Scotland for the last, 20 odd years or more, you are the ones who are failing Scotland, no one else. The ranking relates to a test on a string of measures including income, life expectancy and education, none of which are doing great in Scotland. But I'm not actually going to read through the article because it's just too long and everyone knows that Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP have drove them right into the shit. But it just goes to show it's not been a good couple of days for the SNP. I actually can't wait for Prime Minister's questions tomorrow when we'll hear Ian Blackford crying his little eyes out. I will have my cup ready to catch those Ramona tears. But on that note guys, I am going to end the video there. Nicola Sturgeon's attempt to keep freedom of movement and undermine the UK's immigration policy has failed, it would seem, and it was always likely to. As some of you will know, I have started doing live streams and uploading gaming content on my second channel. If you are interested in joining me for a chat in real time during one of my live streams, have an interest in gaming related content on YouTube, or simply want to follow me over there because you are a legend, the link to subscribe will be down in the video description and as a pinned comment. I hope to see you all there. Now as always, I want to thank our YouTube, PayPal, Patreon and Subscribe Star members for supporting the channel, along with everyone who watches my videos. Remember to let me know what you guys think down in the comments section below, leave a like, subscribe with a notification bell and share this video as it helps the channel a lot, and I'll see you all in the next one.
There is a pattern consistent throughout history of oppressed people turning on the oppressors. Slaves against their owners, the peasantry against the feudal barons, colonies, Mr. Verhofstadt, against their empires. And that is why Britain is leaving. And it doesn't matter which language you use, we are going and we are glad to be going. We're off.
Ramon! Ramon!